Alright, so I'm out here today enjoying the nice weather, and I thought I'd take a little bit of time to compare these two lenses, the Canon 50mm 1.2 and the 85mm 1.2 Mark II. So I know these are not the only two 1.2 lenses available, but as far as I know, for a full-frame DSLR, they're the only modern design with autofunction options available. They're both really close in focal length, and they're both also really expensive, so I think a lot of people will only choose one. If you prefer one focal length over the other, you probably already know that. But for everybody who doesn't, I wanted to give a little side-by-side comparison of other aspects of the lens. The build quality, just the way that it is designed, because they are significantly different, and also of course the performance side by side. So first off, the thing you'll notice is the weight. They are significantly different in weight. The 85mm is much heavier, and while the 50mm is heavier than the standard 51.8, it's not heavy by any means. I think it's a very well balanced combination on, this is the 5D Mark IV. This is a little bit heavy, but because it's short, it's actually not that bad to handle, to be honest with you. But it is a bit bigger. So just to take a quick look at the lens hoods, the 50mm lens hood will snap on just as a standard lens hood does, twists on, and the size is pretty much straight with the lens, so it's actually, even with the lens hood, a really nice, relatively compact, but definitely larger than the standard 51.8 option. But it feels really good in the hand, it's a good balance, it's a good size, I really enjoy using this. When you look at the lens hood for the 85mm, it's a bit larger, and it just kind of snaps on like that, which is actually really easy. Looking at them side by side with the lens hoods, you can see that the size difference is a little bit more significant. And while this is not huge, it's definitely larger than this. So this is probably hard to see on the video, but the outside of the 85mm is mostly covered in a kind of rubbery texture, and it does have this ribbed part all around the lens as well. But together with a rubbery texture, it feels really solid, it feels really easy to grip and easy to hold. It's not metal on the outside, but it does feel solid. So by comparison, the 50mm also has this little bit of a ribbed section around the lens, but it doesn't have that rubbery texture to it. It's the standard L lens kind of little bit bumpy plastic finish, and it is not metal, but again, it does feel good. It feels solid, it feels quality, and I wouldn't be worried about the build quality of this lens. Speaking of that, the 50mm does have a weather sealing gasket around the edge on the back, so it has some level of weather sealing compared to the 85, which does not. While we're talking about the back of the lens here, you'll notice that the 85mm has this kind of glass that goes right up to the edge of the mount here, and it's really flush with the edge, and actually the electric contacts are mounted on top of the glass. So when you're taking it on and off of the camera, you should be a little bit more careful than with other lenses. I guess you should always be careful, but it does have that, and some people are worried that it's very easy to scratch, which it is compared to other lenses. I would never ever put this down without a lens cap on the back of the lens. If that worries you, then just be aware of it. So looking again at the outside of the lens, the manual focus ring on the 85mm is really smooth. It moves very easily, very lightly, very lightly. Some people might say too lightly, that you don't have enough control. But it is a long throw all the way around, so I think you can still get precision control about there. But you'll notice that when I move the ring, the lens is actually not moving, and if you look at the, I don't know if you can see it, but if you look at the focus window here, you can see that the lens is in fact not moving. This is because the power to the camera is off right now. So if I turn the power on and switch this to manual focus, now you'll see that it extends as I turn. And this is extremely light. I mean, I can easily do this with just one finger here. And just to note, this part which extends is made of metal. Also, as a side note, while the barrel does extend, when you put the lens hood on, it covers that up, and the lens hood does not extend. When you turn the focus ring, the lens hood actually turns with it. So that means oppositely, if you turn the lens hood, it's a little bit loose, but the manual focus ring will move a little bit with the lens hood. So just be aware of that. So you'll have to remember this before you turn the camera off, because if your lens is extended and you turn the camera off, then you're going to be stuck with an extended lens. If you want to retract the lens before you turn your camera off, you have to remember to do that, either by manually focusing or just put the lens cap on and autofocus to infinity, and you'll be good. And speaking of the 5D Mark IV, it has the option to retract the lens when you turn the power off, but that doesn't work for the 85mm. It only works for some of the other STM lenses like the 51.8. So just to take a quick look at the 50mm again, the ring on here is a bit more resistant, significantly more resistant if you compare it to the 85, but has a very good feel to it, a very weighted feel. There's no play, and it's a very, very nice focus ring. Now the barrel of this lens does not extend when you focus, but you can see the inside will move, but it stays within the barrel itself, so the actual size of the barrel does not move. And of course this is a regular manual focus, so the manual focus will work even if the power of the camera is not on. When you're in any focus mode on the camera, anytime you turn the focus ring, the focus is going to change. Whereas the 85 will only be affected if you use one-shot focus and you lock focus and then adjust it after that. If you're in any kind of continuous focus or anything like that, the 85mm will not manual focus when you turn the ring. So those are some of the main physical differences of the 50 and 85mm 1.2. I love the way they both feel, and so let's go take a look at how they perform. These are a few pictures I took of my kids at the park while they were playing on a kind of jungle gym made from rope. Since they were moving around quite a bit, and I had to lock focus really quickly when their faces were visible through the openings, I thought it would be a good test of the speed and accuracy of these lenses as well as their sharpness. I think this is a kind of realistic test for these lenses because I highly doubt that anyone expects to use them, especially the 85, for any kind of real actions or sports. Personally, I feel that if they're able to perform fast and accurate enough for a situation like this, they'll do just fine for any situation they'll likely be put in. On that note, I shot this particular series at f2 because they were far from a stationary portrait subject, and the idea of shooting kids playing at 1.2 makes my head hurt. They were shot relatively close though, so even at f2 the depth of field is very shallow. Of course, everyone wants to see how they perform wide open though, so I will get to that after. Before we get any more into these pictures, I just want to say that I did process these a little bit for color and exposure and stuff, but I didn't touch anything that would affect their sharpness. So for sharpness, what you see is what came out of the camera. Now looking close at a couple of these pictures, starting with the 50mm, if you look in close, this is at 100%, you can see it nailed focus right on his eye, and it's very sharp. Looking at just a couple more, you can see again that pretty much all of these shots nailed right on his eye, and it's very sharp. This one too, even though it's very close to the rope, it nailed focus just perfectly right on her eye. And you can see all of the eyelashes and everything, and pretty much every photo in this series was more or less the same as this, except for the shots that I expected to be drastically out of focus. Now looking at the 85, if anything, I'd have to say that it's ever so slightly sharper than the 50 actually. And it's just, you can see every little detail of his eye and his skin and all the boogers coming out of his nose. And again, this was pretty much the same story for all of the images that I shot with the 85, except for the ones that I expected to be out of focus for some whatever reason. So I'll also note that I shot the 50mm first, and I hardly even noticed it focusing. When I moved to the 85, it literally felt slow. The glass elements are so large and heavy that you can hear and feel them moving inside the lens, and the speed is definitely slower. If you're pre-focused at either extreme, then you might miss a critical shot, but as long as I wasn't far off to begin with, I had no problem locking focus on an eye the second that I saw it poke out from behind the ropes. So we had the sun coming in behind them a bit, so I tried to see what I could get as far as flare, and I was fairly impressed, but that's not to say there was no flare. Some lenses can shoot right into the sun and hardly show any loss of contrast or other aberrations such as ghosting. These are definitely not in that category, but it's definitely far from a displeasing effect. Of course, this is personal opinion, but I've definitely seen some lenses which produce not only noticeable flare, but a very distracting and unattractive flare. Even though you can see some ghosting in the 50mm, down in the corner here, for example, the same in this shot, you can see a little bit here. I think that it's relatively well controlled considering I was shooting straight into the sun. Other than that, there's a slight loss of contrast, but it's really not anything significant. The 85 has a little bit less of that very clearly defined ghosting down here, but you can see a little bit. Generally though, it has more of a overall hazy look to the image. I do actually really like this appearance though, and I always love the shots that I get from the 85 when I'm shooting backlit or straight into the sun. So just to recap, when slightly stopped down to f2 in this case, the 85 does appear ever so slightly sharper than the 50, but this is far from a scientific test. It's hard to say which handles flare better. I find that the 50mm shows more clearly defined flare spots, while the 85 loses more contrast and becomes kind of more hazy overall. I personally would still choose the 85's appearance though. I love how the shots come out when you're shooting straight into the sun. The 50mm is much faster at focusing, although in all but extreme cases, the 85 is definitely sufficient for almost all types of portrait or non-high action sports needs. Next up, let's take a look at their performance wide open. I'll just take a few shots to show you the performance wide open at 1.2 and to see how the working distance is for kind of headshot, a half body shot, and a little bit of a full body shot, as well as how the background looks at each of those distances. So I just took these pictures really quickly for demonstration purposes. Don't worry about the actual content so much as just looking at the qualities of the lens. These are my wife, and I was just trying to snap them quickly to get it over with so she wouldn't get too annoyed with me. Looking at the headshot framing side by side, you can immediately see that the background is greatly different. The 85 background just completely melts away. It's on the right side if you can't tell. And while the background on the 50mm shot is still gorgeous and I think really nice amount of separation, there's just no comparison to the 85. The background is just gone on the 85. If you look at the eye, you can see that the sharpness is actually pretty comparable at this point and at this distance. And I definitely can say from this shoot and other shoots as well that nailing focus when you're wide open at 1.2, especially at this close distance, is going to be much more of an issue than having to worry about how sharp the lens is going to be. Looking closer at the background, you can see that the autofocus highlights are pretty similar. Of course, the size is different, but the general smoothness is almost identical. So looking at the half-body portrait, I shot this in landscape mode. But if you shoot in portrait mode, you could get a little bit closer and therefore have a very slightly more blurry background. But even at this distance, both of them I think have plenty, so there's nothing to complain about. If you look in at 100%, you'll see that the 50mm looks a little bit sharper, but this could just be these two particular shots. And also I think that the slight lack of contrast you can notice, especially in the jacket, compared to the 50mm, gives it a little bit of a less sharp appearance. So looking in a little bit closer at the background, you can see that of course the 85mm still has more blur, and I would say that the bokeh balls on the 85mm now are about the same size as they were on the 50mm for the headshot. So finally, looking at the full-length portraits, you'll see right away that there's a pretty noticeable difference in the general appearance of these two images. The 85, which of course is on the right, has, again, a little bit less contrast than the 50mm, but I think it's a very beautiful, kind of artistic, dreamy look, which matches really well with portraits. Looking in at 100%, the eyeball is very slightly out of focus. I think I was focusing and recomposing, so with this super shallow depth of field, it's really easy to very slightly misfocus when you're doing that. And if you look down at the jacket, either the button or this kind of lapel area, I think is where the highest amount of sharpness is in these images. And again, same as the last image, I think that the 50mm appears very slightly sharper, but part of that is due to the lack of contrast on the 85 side. Looking at the autofocus background, some highlights here. They're not so different, but I'll let you be the judge of which is better, or however you would qualify this kind of thing. So it's really hard to say which of these lenses I would recommend. I think that it really depends on each individual person. Of course, the focal length is going to be very important for you, and they definitely have each their own strengths and weaknesses. So which of those is more important to you is definitely different from which of those is important to me. I hope this video could help you to get an idea of which is better for you, or if you actually want them both for different purposes, like I personally do. Of course, there are cheaper alternatives of both of these lenses. There's the 50 1.8, the 50 1.4, and the 85 1.8, and there are also great third-party lenses which are available. So you really have to decide if the price of these lenses is worth it for you. So the benefit you're going to get for paying more for these lenses is build quality, reliability, the way it generally renders the image, and of course the autofocus background. The 1.2 aperture might not get a huge difference in how blurry the background is, but I think that these lenses' quality of the autofocus background is definitely different than the 1.8 or 1.4 versions. Whether you think that's better or not is, I think, largely up to taste. So again, I really hope this video helped you get an idea of the kind of personality of these lenses and how they compare to each other, but also just how they perform in general. So as always, if you have any questions, comments, corrections, if you love this video, if you hated this video, please let me know in the comments below, and let me know if there's anything else you want to see in the future. I would love it if you could like this video and also subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Please come back and watch more videos in the future, and don't forget to tell me what you want to see. As always, thanks for watching.